Hey guys, tonight we are slipping back through the soft curtain of time, not to a grand battlefield or a gilded throne room, but to the warm, dusty streets of a doomed city. We're journeying to Pompeii in the summer of 79 AD to uncover the soothing, rhythmic story of a technology that lies at the very heart of civilization, the bread oven. We'll smell the wood smoke, feel the volcanic stone, and trace the entire life of a loaf of bread from a sack of grain to a baker's cooling rack. It's a story of craft, community, and the quiet dignity of daily work. Of course, given the time and place, you'll be doing all this on the slopes of a notoriously ill-tempered volcano, so my usual advice stands. You probably won't survive this. Think of it as the ultimate ephemeral experience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly makes these journeys possible. And as always, I'd love to see where and when you're tuning in from. So drop your city and local time down in the comments. It's always a quiet thrill to see our little community of night owls and history lovers stretching all across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air that greets you is thick and warm, heavy with the scent of salt from the nearby Bay of Naples, mingling with pine resin, blooming oleander, and something else. Something savory and a little funky that you can't quite place. That, my friend, is the smell of garum, the fermented fish sauce the Romans put on almost everything. Let's just agree to file that under acquired taste and gently walk. Upwind, you're standing on the Via dell'Abbondanza, the street of abundance, and it lives up to its name. The road beneath your sandals isn't a smooth, modern pavement, but a series of enormous, uneven polygonal stones of dark basalt, slick in places from the morning's water delivery. The curbs are shockingly high, almost knee-high, turning the street into a shallow canal for rainwater and, let's be honest, all manner of less pleasant waste. How do you cross without wading through? Well, everything. You use the pondera, three large, strategically placed stepping stones that rise like small islands in the middle of the road. They're spaced just so, allowing pedestrians to cross, with their dignity and hemlines intact, while the wheels of a passing cart can straddle them perfectly. It's a simple, ingenious solution to a messy problem, a testament to Roman pragmatism. The sounds are a chaotic symphony. There's the low, rhythmic grinding of stone on stone coming from a nearby building, the sharp braying of a donkey protesting its load, and the constant murmur of voices. It's mostly Latin, of course, but you catch snippets of Oscan, the older, local language, still spoken by many here in Campania. Merchants are shouting their daily prices from stalls built into the front of their homes, their voices competing with the clatter of wooden cartwheels on the hard stone. You see a wealthy man, a patrician, his toga immaculately white and draped in a way that seems both regal and impossibly complicated. He's followed by an enslaved person carrying a stack of clay amphorae, his steps measured and careful. Further down, children are crouched in a doorway, loudly arguing over a game of knucklebones. It's a city thrumming with life, a vibrant, living organism going about its day as you meander, letting the current of the crowd carry you along. A new scent begins to cut through the olfactory chaos. It's a smell that's deeply, fundamentally comforting. It's the smell of baking bread. Warm, toasty, with a slightly sweet, fermented undertone. It's a scent that speaks of home, of sustenance, of community. And once you notice it, you realize it's everywhere, a gentle, pervasive hum beneath the sharper city smells. You start to see the sources, open-fronted shops, some with counters facing the street, displaying round, dark-crusted loaves. These are the pastrina, the bakeries of Pompeii, and there are so many of them. Archaeologists have so far unearthed the remains of more than 30 distinct bakeries within the city walls. For a population estimated to be around 11 or 12,000 people, that is a staggering number. It speaks volumes about the diet of the average citizen. This wasn't a city where a family baked its own weekly supply. This was a city that ran on professionally produced bread, a place where buying your daily loaf was as routine as drawing water from the corner fountain. You pass one bakery where a sign, a dipinto painted directly onto the stucco wall, advertises its wares. The letters are rustic capitals, confident and clear. Further down, you see a different kind of public notice, a bit of political graffiti endorsing a candidate for local office, promising he's a good man. Clearly, negative. Campaigning hadn't been invented yet. Or maybe they just painted over those bits more quickly. The walls themselves are a riot of color: deep reds, golden yellows, brilliant blues, fading and peeling under the relentless Italian sun. Everything feels intensely alive and, paradoxically, intensely permanent. The stone, the plaster, the sheer weight of the buildings give a sense of unshakable solidity. You turn off the main thoroughfare into a quieter side street, the Vico Stordo. The noise of the crowds recedes, replaced by a more industrial hum. The smell of bread is stronger here, almost thick enough to taste. You can feel a wave of dry heat emanating from a wide doorway ahead. This, you sense, is the source. It's a bakery, but one that seems larger, more focused on production than sales. There is no neat counter here, just a cavernous opening that leads into a dusty, dim interior. From this vantage point, you can see the engine room of the whole operation. In the center of a large courtyard stand for massive, strange-looking contraptions. They look like giant stone hourglasses or abstract sculptures of Diabolo toys. These are the mills, the machines that grind the grain into flour. Their upper, funnel-like stones are attached to a wooden framework designed to be pushed by a donkey, or, for smaller operations, by human hands, walking in an endless, patient circle. The sound you've been hearing, that low grinding, is the sound of these mills at work, but your eyes and your senses are drawn past the mills to the back of the workspace. There, built into the wall, is a hulking dome of brick and volcanic stone. Its arched opening is a black mouth, glowing with a faint, deep orange life from within. This is it, the oven, the fornax. It's bigger than you imagined, a solid, immovable presence that dominates the entire building. The air around it shimmers with heat, and the wall above its opening is blackened with soot. This is the heart of the pastrinum. Everything else, the mills, the kneading troughs, the workers, all revolves around this simple, powerful piece of technology. You stand at the threshold, an invisible visitor watching a 2,000-year-old routine. You wonder about the daily life of the people inside. While bread was clearly a staple, was it the only staple? Historians still argue whether the diet of the common Pompeian was primarily these hearty bakery loaves, or if the ancient tradition of pulse, a simple but filling porridge made from emmer wheat, still held sway in many households. Perhaps the bread was a convenience food, the fast food of its day, while the porridge was the traditional home-cooked meal. The sheer scale of this bakery suggests, however, that bread was big business. It was a pillar of the urban economy. That oven wasn't just for one family. It was a furnace that fed a neighborhood, turning raw grain into the energy that fueled the city. It's a quiet, unassuming dome of brick, but as you watch the dance of heat and shadow around its mouth, you realize you're looking at the silent, patient hero of this entire story. And you know you have to get a closer look. You take a tentative step across the threshold, moving from the bright, chaotic street into the hazy twilight of the bakery. There's no friendly greeting or a little bell that jingles. Your welcome party is a blast of hot, floury air and the suspicious side-eye from a donkey currently harnessed to one of the giant mills. It plods in a circle, its hooves shuffling, softly in the dust, condemned to a life of ambulatory geology, grinding stone against stone. The air is thick with contradictions, the sweet, promising scent of yeast and warm flour duels with the sharp, earthy smell of animal sweat and the faint, acrid tang of soot. This is no quaint artisan kitchen. This is a machine, a factory floor dedicated to a single, relentless purpose: transmuting grain into sustenance, day in and day out. And looking around at the sheer scale of the operation, you begin to understand why a place like this has to exist. This shift to commercial baking wasn't a matter of convenience. It was a matter of necessity, driven by the very structure of Roman urban life. For centuries, the Roman ideal was the self-sufficient household, the domus, or the mater familias. The lady of the house would oversee the baking of bread for her family. On a country estate or in a spacious old city home, there would be a hearth, maybe even a small, dedicated oven in a courtyard. But Pompeii, for all its villas of the rich, was also a city of the working class and the poor, many of whom lived in multi-story apartment buildings called insulae. You can picture them, tightly packed, often timber-framed structures where families lived in one or two small rooms. There was no space for a personal kitchen, let alone a wood-fired oven. The fire risk would have been catastrophic. A single stray ember in one of those cramped, flammable buildings could take out an entire city block. So, for the vast majority of Pompeii's residents, baking at home was simply not an option. You didn't make your bread, you bought it. This reality created a new kind of citizen and a new kind of economy. It fueled the rise of the specialist, the craftsman, the pister. He wasn't just a baker. He was a vital piece of public infrastructure, as important as the aqueduct engineer or the road builder. His ovens were a public utility, his product the fuel of the masses. As you watch the men working inside this bakery, you see that specialization in motion. One man, stripped to the waist, his muscles slick with sweat and dusted with flour, methodically pushes a wooden pole into a massive stone trough, folding a mountain of grayish dough. Another two are rhythmically working one of the mills by hand, their movements synchronized, their faces set in grim concentration. This wasn't a passion project. This was hard, repetitive, physical labor. And at the center of their world, governing their rhythms and their deadlines, is that great, brooding oven. The man who owned a place like this stood to become incredibly wealthy and respected. Perhaps the owner of this very bakery dreamed of a legacy like that of Marcus Virgilius Eurysaces in Rome. Eurysaces was a baker, likely a former slave, who became so successful that he commissioned a massive, truly eccentric tomb for himself and his wife right outside the city gates. It's one of the most remarkable funerary monuments of the ancient world, decorated with a frieze showing every single stage of the baking process: milling, kneading, baking, and distributing. The tomb itself is built to resemble the stone cylinders of a grain silo and the openings of a baker's oven. It's a loud, proud, permanent declaration of his profession. It says, "I was a baker, and I was so good at it that I became a titan of industry." This wasn't just a job. It was an identity, a source of immense pride, and, clearly, immense profit. But who exactly owned this specific pastrinum where you now stand? Historians still argue whether these large bakeries were typically owned by wealthy aristocrats as hands-off investments, managed on their behalf by a trusted freedman, a former slave, or if they represented a direct opportunity for those very freedmen to claw their way up the social and economic ladder. Could a clever, ambitious man, freed from servitude, secure a loan, lease a building, and build his own bread empire from the floor up? Or was this enterprise, like so many others, ultimately controlled by the same old, powerful families who owned the land and held the political offices? The answer is likely both. Pompeii was a city of social mobility, a place where new money could and did challenge old. This bakery could be the investment of a senator living in a grand villa on the hill, or it could be the entire world of a hard-working man named Lucius or Marcus who earned his freedom and was now building a legacy, one loaf at a time. The local health inspector is a stray dog sniffing near the kneading trough, hoping for a dropped piece of dough. He seems pretty happy with the standards, so you figure it's best not to ask too many questions. You drift deeper into the room, past the endlessly circling donkey. He seems utterly unimpressed by the miracle of leavened bread, his focus entirely on the more pressing miracle of when, precisely, his shift is going to end. The floor is packed earth, uneven and gritty. Everything and everyone is covered in a fine, pale dust of flour. It settles on your clothes, in your hair. You can feel its powdery texture on your tongue. The noise is constant. The groan of the stone mills, the wet slap and thud of the dough, the low murmur of the bakers speaking to each other in short, clipped phrases. And underneath it all, a soft, menacing crackle from the back of the room. It's the sound of the fire, the hungry heart of the oven. The commercial necessity of this place is now clear. The social structure it fits within makes a certain kind of sense. But the technology itself, the thing that makes this entire enterprise possible, remains a mystery. You find your attention drawn away from the workers, away from the groaning mills, and pulled inexorably toward the source of that heat. You move toward that beautiful, terrifying dome of brick and stone, drawn by a need to understand how it works. You need to see how it's built, what secret geometry lies within that allows it to absorb so much heat and bake so much bread so perfectly. You're about to dissect the anatomy of a Pompeian oven that you're standing so close now that the heat is a physical presence, a dry, pressing wave that pushes against your skin and makes the air in your lungs feel thin. You feel your eyebrows, considering an early retirement. The baker nearest the fire seems unbothered, which suggests he probably sacrificed his to the oven gods many seasons ago. Before you is the heart of the matter, the brick beehive. It's not just an appliance. It's a piece of architecture, a solid, immovable feature of the building. The exterior is a rough dome of reddish-brown bricks and dark, porous chunks of local volcanic stone called tufa, all held together by a thick, sandy mortar. It stands waist-high at its opening and curves back into a deep dome that disappears into the rear wall of the bakery. It looks ancient, powerful, and brutally simple. There are no dials, no gauges, no thermometers. It's the ultimate no-tech gadget. Its user interface is a stone plug, and its power source is just burning things. Yet, as you're about to learn, its design is deceptively brilliant. The fundamental principle behind this hulking dome is that of a retained heat oven. This is the secret to its efficiency and its genius. You don't bake the bread at the same time as the fire is roaring. That would be chaotic, impossible to control, and would cover everything in soot. Instead, you treat the oven like a thermal battery. For hours, a massive fire is built directly inside the baking chamber. The dense, thick masonry of the dome and the floor greedily soaks up this thermal energy, drawing it deep into its core. The structure is a heat sponge. Once the oven is saturated with heat, a state the baker would know not by a timer's beep, but by the color of the stones and the feel of the air, the fire is completely scraped out. All the embers, ash, and soot are removed, leaving behind a pristine, intensely hot chamber. The baking is then done with the pure, radiant energy bleeding back out of the masonry. This method provides a consistent, penetrating heat that is perfect for baking loaf after loaf. Now, let's dissect this magnificent beast. Look at the dome itself, the fornix. Its low, curved ceiling isn't just for show. This precise parabolic shape is an engineering marvel. As the heat radiates out from the floor and walls, the dome reflects it back down, evenly, onto the surface of the bread below. There are no hot spots. Every loaf placed on the oven floor, or solia, receives a near-identical blast of radiant energy from all directions. This ensures a uniform bake, a perfect rise, and a crisp, golden brown crust. The floor you're peering at is made of large, flat terracotta tiles, fitted together with masterful precision. These tiles are chosen for their mass and their ability to transfer that stored heat directly and steadily into the base of the loaves. And what about the smoke? You'd expect a chimney, a flue sticking right out of the top. But you don't see. 1. This is another subtle piece of genius. Many of these Pompeian ovens vented from the front. Above the main opening, or prefernium, there's a separate hood or channel built into the wall that leads upwards. This draws the smoke out of the bakery while the fire is burning, but it doesn't vent the oven chamber itself. When the fire is removed and the bread is put in, the opening is sealed, often with a simple stone plug or a sheet of iron. This traps the heat and, crucially, it traps the steam that is released from the dough during the first few minutes of baking. This steam-rich atmosphere is vital for getting a good oven spring, the rapid expansion of the loaf, and for creating that glossy, crackling crust that makes fresh bread so irresistible. It's a closed system, a sealed chamber of heat and steam. The very materials they used were a testament to their craft. Historians still argue whether the specific mixture of volcanic sand, known as pozzolana, in their mortar was a happy regional accident or a deliberately engineered secret to creating a cement that was exceptionally strong and incredibly heat-resistant. This pozzolana concrete was one of Rome's great technological gifts to the world, allowing them to build structures that were both massive and durable. Here, in this humble bakery, that same material science is at play, creating an oven that could withstand dramatic temperature cycles, day after day, year after year, without cracking. Built to last wasn't just a slogan. This oven looks like it could withstand a minor siege, which, considering its eventual fate under the eruption of Vesuvius, is a rather poignant bit of over-engineering. A baker, his face grim with concentration, uses a long-handled rake to scrape the last of the glowing embers out of the oven's mouth. They cascade onto the stone floor in a shower of orange sparks, which he expertly quenches with a bucket of water, sending up a hiss and a plume of steam. The chamber is now empty, clean, and shimmering with an almost invisible, potent heat. It's ready. The air it breathes out is like a dragon's sigh, utterly pure and dangerously hot. The oven has been charged, its power cell is full. But this entire, brilliant process is dependent on one thing. To charge this thermal battery, you need a tremendous amount of fuel. The design is only half the story. You have to feed the beast. Looking over to a shadowed corner of the bakery, you see a testament to the oven's insatiable appetite, a floor-to-ceiling mountain of wood, stacked high and deep. And you immediately realize that keeping this perfect heat sponge fed was a monumental, back-breaking task in itself, a constant battle against scarcity and logistics. Your eyes adjust to the gloom of the corner, and the mountain of fuel comes into focus. It's not a neat, uniform stack of perfectly split logs like you might see at a modern resort. It's a chaotic jumble of raw energy. There are thick, heavy sections of oak and beech, their cut ends showing the tight grain that promises a long, hot burn. You see gnarled, twisted branches that look like they were pruned from olive groves, their silvery bark still intact. There are bundles of vine clippings, tied together with rushes, looking dry and brittle. This wasn't artisanal, locally sourced firewood. This was whatever Gaius could haul back from the woods without throwing his back out firewood. The original gig economy. The air in this corner smells different, not of baking, but of the forest floor, of dry earth, resin, and the quiet, patient scent of seasoned wood waiting for its final, glorious purpose. Feeding this oven was a constant, voracious demand. A Roman baker couldn't just pop down to the corner store for a bag of charcoal. Fuel was a major logistical challenge and a significant operating expense. The wood you're looking at began its journey miles away, in the forest that carpeted the slopes of Mount Vesuvius and the surrounding hills of Campania. There, woodcutters and charcoal burners, the carbonarii, would work from dawn till dusk, felling trees and lopping branches. It was hard, dangerous work, and these men were often on the lower rungs of the social ladder. They understood the forest's secrets, however. The Romans were intensely practical, and they knew that not all wood was created equal. They were well aware that dense hardwoods like oak burned hotter and for far longer than softer woods like poplar or alder. A baker would have prized oak above all else for the crucial task of bringing the massive oven up to its peak temperature. The lesser woods, the agricultural trimmings, the bundles of twigs, they had their place, perhaps for the initial, smoky stages of firing, but the real work was done by the heavyweights. Once cut, the wood began its slow journey to the city. You can imagine the scene: a sturdy, two-wheeled cart, piled impossibly high with logs, groaning under the weight. A single mule, or perhaps a pair of oxen, strains to pull the load along a dusty track, the driver shouting encouragement and cracking a whip. The cart would eventually join a main road, maybe the very one you walked down earlier, and navigate the tight, crowded streets of Pompeii. The baker probably had a love-hate relationship with his wood supplier. He loved to see the cart arrive, a sign that he could continue his business, but he likely hated the invoice that came with it, a timeless business tradition that apparently transcends millennia. The cost of this fuel would have been a constant pressure on the baker's profit margins, fluctuating with the seasons, the weather, and even the political stability of the region. A wet winter could make the roads impassable, choking the supply and sending prices soaring. In lean times, a baker had to be resourceful. When prime hardwood became too expensive, or when the supply chain was disrupted, they would have to turn to less desirable, but still combustible, materials. This is where the real ingenuity of the working class shines through. They would burn dried olive pits, the leftover refuse from the city's many olive oil presses. They might use mountains of nutshells, or even the dried husks and cobs of corn. Trying to heat a 2-ton brick oven with bundles of twigs is the ancient equivalent of trying to charge your phone by rubbing it on the carpet. A lot of effort for very little result, but when it's all you have, you make it work. This constant search for fuel connects the bakery to the entire agricultural ecosystem of the region, turning waste products from one industry into the lifeblood of another. This insatiable demand for wood, not just from the 30-plus bakeries, but from the public baths with their heated pools, the blacksmiths, the glassblowers, and every private home with a cooking brazier, must have had a profound effect on the local landscape. Historians still argue whether the immense fuel demands of industries like these led to significant, visible deforestation around major Roman cities like Pompeii. Standing here, smelling the wood smoke that hangs in the air, you can almost picture the surrounding hills looking a bit patchier than they should. It's a strangely modern thought to have in this ancient place. The idea that a city's consumption could scar the very earth that sustained it. Were there regulations? Was there a concept of sustainable forestry? Or was it simply a free-for-all? A constant push outwards to find new sources of energy as the old ones were depleted? The process of firing the oven was a science and an art form. It wasn't just a matter of chucking logs into the void. The fire had to be built carefully, starting with small kindling and progressing to the larger logs, layering them to ensure proper airflow so the fire could breathe and grow to its maximum intensity. The goal was to create a rolling, roaring inferno that filled the entire dome, licking at every surface of the brick and tile, pouring heat into the masonry hour after hour. This complex dance of fuel and flame, this transformation of a static pile of wood into a perfectly controlled, radiant baking environment, required more than just muscle. It couldn't be done by a novice. It required a master, a specialist whose entire world revolved around the care and feeding of this fiery heart. This was the job of the fornicator, the keeper of the furnace, and his day, you realize, must have started long before anyone else's, in the cold, dark hours before the dawn. Long before the first street vendors begin to hawk their wares. Long before the sun even thinks about touching the peak of Vesuvius, the bakery is not entirely still. It exists in a cold, deep darkness, silent save for the skittering of a mouse. But then, a shape detaches itself from the shadows. It's a man, moving with the quiet economy of someone who knows his space intimately. His alarm clock is a rooster crowing somewhere in the city, but his snooze button is the profound realization that a 2-ton brick oven will not, in fact, heat itself. This is the fornicator, the keeper of the furnace, and his day begins while the rest of Pompeii dreams. His name is the oven he serves, Fornax. His entire identity is tied to the fire. He's likely not the owner, but a worker of low status, perhaps enslaved, or a freedman earning a meager wage. Yet, in this moment, he is the most important person in the city. His first task is a dirty one. He takes a long-handled iron rake and a wide shovel and begins to clean out the oven's chamber. A cascade of cool, gray ash from yesterday's fire spills onto the floor, sending up a cloud that smells of old smoke and dust. He works methodically, scraping the solia clean, ensuring not a single ember remains that could taint the new fire or the first loaves of bread. This job comes with a unique retirement plan. Eventually, you've inhaled so much smoke and soot that you simply become a part of the bakery's general ambience. It's not a great plan, but it's a form of immortality, I suppose. Once the chamber is pristine, the real work begins. He doesn't just toss wood inside. He builds the fire with the meticulous care of a sculptor. He starts with a handful of tinder, dried moss, wood shavings, perhaps a bit of lint, which he places in the center of the oven floor. Using a flint and steel, he strikes sparks into the tinder, blowing gently, coaxing the tiny embers into a fragile, flickering flame. In these first few moments, the vast, cold oven seems to swallow the light. But the fornicator is patient. He feeds the infant flame with the smallest, driest twigs, then with larger kindling, arranging each piece to allow for the free passage of air. He understands that fire, like any living thing, must breathe. Only when the kindling is burning with a steady, confident crackle does he introduce the first of the heavy logs, the dense oak that will form the roaring heart of the inferno. He is a conductor, and his orchestra is combustion. This is not unskilled labor. It is a profound craft, a body of knowledge learned through years of trial, error, and probably a few singed eyebrows. The fornicator reads the fire like a scholar reads a text. He can tell by the color of the flames, from a lazy, smoky orange to a clean, bright yellow, if the combustion is efficient. He can interpret the sounds, the deep rumble of a healthy fire versus the choked hiss of one that is being starved of air. He probably talks to the oven, not in a frantic, unhinged way, but in the weary, familiar way you might talk to a stubborn old mule. A mixture of encouragement, threats, and resigned partnership. His senses are his instruments. He knows, just by the feel of the radiant heat on his face and arms, how the process is going. This relationship with such a powerful, dangerous force like fire likely went beyond the purely practical. The oven was, in essence, a domestic volcano, a capricious and powerful entity contained within the bakery walls. It's easy to imagine the fornicator having his own private rituals to ensure its cooperation. Perhaps he scatters a pinch of the first flour of the day as an offering, a small sacrifice to the spirit of the oven. Maybe he mutters a quiet prayer to Vulcan, the god of fire, volcanoes, and all things forged in heat, asking for a steady burn and protection from a stray spark that could burn the whole building down. These small superstitions would have been a way to feel some measure of control, a way to humanize the elemental force he commanded daily. The social standing of such a man is a fascinating question. Historians still argue whether a skilled fornicator, despite his probable status as an enslaved person, was a highly valued and respected artisan, or if he was viewed as just another piece of living machinery. Was his deep, intuitive knowledge of thermodynamics recognized as a unique and valuable skill by the pister, the bakery owner? Or was he seen as easily replaceable, just a man strong enough to haul wood and tough enough to withstand the heat? He occupied a strange place in the social hierarchy, indispensable to the business, yet likely invisible to the wealthy customer buying the final product. He was the master of the heat that fed the city, but his own life was lived in the shadows, covered in soot. For hours, he tends his creation. The fire grows from a flicker to a bonfire, then to a roaring, rolling inferno that fills the entire dome. The light pours from the oven's mouth, painting the fornicator's face in sweat-slicked shades of orange and red, turning the dark bakery into a flickering cavern. The heat is immense now, a palpable force that makes the air ripple and hum. He watches the color of the interior bricks change, slowly glowing from black to a dull cherry red, then brightening to a brilliant, almost white heat. He knows the oven is almost ready. Its thermal battery is nearly charged. As the oven roars, transforming that chaotic pile of wood into a pure, stored energy, the first gray light of dawn begins to filter into the courtyard through the high, unglazed windows. The fornicator has done his job. The bakery's heart is now beating with a powerful, steady rhythm. And with the coming of the light, the rest of the body must stir to life, beginning with the rhythmic, dusty, circular work of the mills. As the fornicator continues his fiery vigil, other figures begin to populate the bakery, their movements synchronized with the slowly strengthening dawn. These are the millers and kneaders, the next link in the production chain. Their attention is focused on the four colossal stone hourglasses that dominate the center of the courtyard. The sound of the bakery is about to change from the solitary roar of the oven to the rhythmic, grinding chorus of the mills. This is where the day's bread truly begins, not as dough, but as hard, dry kernels of grain. You move closer to one of the mills, a mola asinaria, or donkey mill. It is a masterpiece of functional design. The base, called the meta, is a solid, immovable cone of hard volcanic rock, fixed to a circular stone platform. The top piece, the catalyst, is the hourglass shape, a massive, hollowed-out stone that fits perfectly over the stationary cone. At its top is a wide, funnel-like opening where the grain is poured. The real magic happens in the narrow space between the inner surface of the catalyst and the outer surface of the meta. As the top stone turns, the grain is sheared and crushed between the two rough, abrasive surfaces, transforming from kernel to flour before falling from the bottom edge and collecting in a neat, circular trough carved into the platform below. The power for this brute force transformation comes from the most reliable engine of the ancient world, a very tired-looking donkey. Another worker leads the animal into position, attaching its harness to a heavy wooden frame that slots into the catalyst. The donkey's job description is simple: walk in a circle. Do not have any bright ideas. Do not form a union. To prevent dizziness from the endless circling, its eyes are covered with a leather blindfold. The worker gives the animal a slap on the rump, and with a weary sigh that seems to speak for all put-upon beasts of burden throughout history, the donkey begins to walk. The great stone catalyst groans into motion, and a low, gritty rumble fills the air, the sound of geology being weaponized against breakfast. It's the official soundtrack of every Monday morning in history that a boy climbs onto a small stool and begins pouring grain from a sack into the mill's funnel. The kernels disappear into the stone maw, and moments later, a pale, cream-colored stream begins to issue from the bottom, piling up in the channel. The air immediately becomes thick with a fine, powdery dust that coats every surface and catches in the back of your throat. It smells nutty and raw, the ghost of the grain released by the violence of the stones. Attached to the donkey's harness is a small string of bronze bells. Their constant, gentle jingling provides a strange, almost cheerful counterpoint to the heavy, laboring sound of the mill. Historians speculate these bells had a practical purpose beyond just making noise. If the jingling stopped, the baker immediately knew the donkey had halted its work and needed a sharp word or a prod to get moving again. It was an ancient, low-tech productivity monitor. Not all the mills are powered by animals. You see two men, their bodies lean and corded with muscle, pushing the heavy arms of another mill. Their movements are slow, rhythmic, and relentless. It's grueling, mind-numbing work, often reserved for the lowest status workers, sometimes as a form of punishment. As they push, they lean their whole body weight into the task, their bare feet finding purchase on the dusty floor. They don't speak. They just breathe, their exhalations punctuating the constant, grating sound of the stones. This is the raw, human engine that powered much of the Roman world. A reminder that behind the grand architecture and sophisticated engineering, there was always the sweat and strain of anonymous bodies. The flour that trickles from the mill is not the fine, white powder you might be used to. It's a coarse, slightly gritty meal, flecked with darker bits of bran and chaff. Archaeologists and food historians still debate the exact quality of this flour. Was it used as is, creating a dense, gritty bread that would have been tough on the teeth? The significant tooth were found on many Pompeian skeletons suggests this might be the case. Or were the bakers more sophisticated, using sieves made of linen or horsehair to sift the flour into different grades? Perhaps the coarsest flour was for the cheapest loaves sold to the poor, while a finer, sifted flour was reserved for more delicate pastries or for the bread of the wealthy. That whole grain texture wasn't a healthy lifestyle choice. It was simply the default setting. A little extra crunch from stone dust was just part of the authentic Pompeian bread experience. The donkey plods on, the men continue to push, and the piles of warm, fresh flour grow steadily. The air is now so thick with dust that the shafts of morning light cutting through the high windows look solid, like ethereal pillars holding up the roof. One of the workers, a young boy, begins to scoop the precious product from the collecting troughs into large wicker baskets. The flour is warm to the touch, alive with the friction of its own creation. It's no longer an inert seed. It's a potential, a promise of the bread to come. This warm, gritty flour, still humming with the memory of the stones, is the raw material for the next act. It is carried from the dust-choked arena of the mills to a different station, a place of water, salt, and quiet magic, where it will be transformed from a simple powder into a living, breathing dough. The boy with the wicker baskets tips his dusty cargo into a huge, trough-like basin in another corner of the bakery. This station, the alveus, is where the alchemy happens. The air here is less dusty, more humid, and carries a distinct, tangy aroma, like sour fruit or yogurt. The chaotic, grinding noise of the mills gives way to the wet, rhythmic sounds of slapping and folding. Here, the raw powder from the earth is coaxed into life. You watch as a baker, a man whose forearms are thick as mooring ropes, begins the process. The recipe is brutally simple, a holy trinity of ingredients that has sustained humanity for millennia: flour, water, and salt. He adds water from a clay amphora, hauled earlier from the nearest public fountain, and a handful of coarse gray salt. harvested from the coastal pans near the city, but it's the fourth ingredient that holds the real secret. The baker shuffles over to a smaller clay pot sitting in a warm spot near the oven. He lifts the cloth covering it, and the tangy smell intensifies. Inside is a bubbling, living, beige-colored paste. This is the fermentum, the leaven. It's a piece of dough saved from yesterday's batch, carefully nurtured overnight. This is the bakery sourdough starter, its oldest and most essential employee. It's been here for years, it smells a little funny, and it's responsible for most of the gas in the room. It is a living colony of wild yeasts and lactobacilli, microorganisms captured from the air and the grain itself, now harnessed to do the baker's work. He scoops out a generous portion of this bubbling life force and plops it into the trough. This is the soul of the bakery, the unbroken chain connecting today's bread with all the bread that came before it. Now, the real labor begins. The baker plunges his arms into the trough up to his elbows and begins to mix. This is the original CrossFit workout. There's no need for a gym membership when your daily job involves wrestling 100 pounds of wet, sticky dough into submission. He pulls and stretches, folds and presses, his body moving in a steady, powerful rhythm. At first, the mixture is a shaggy, uncooperative mess. But slowly, miraculously, it begins to transform. The water hydrates the flour, the gluten proteins begin to link up, and the mass becomes smoother, more elastic, more cohesive. Some larger, more industrial bakeries might have had a mechanical kneader here, a massive trough with a rotating wooden arm powered by the same long-suffering donkey. That turned the mill, but here, it is done by hand, a testament to pure human strength and endurance. The baker's biceps have their own biceps. The unique character of a Pompeian bakery's bread came directly from its starter. Just as a vineyard's terroir gives its wine a specific flavor, the very air in this bakery gave its fermentum a unique, microbial fingerprint. The wild yeasts floating around this specific neighborhood, perhaps different from those a few blocks away near the fish market or the tanneries, would have created a starter with a distinct taste. The bread from this pastrinum might have been known for its particularly sour tang, while another might have produced a milder, more earthy loaf. This was a baker's signature, his intellectual property, cultivated not in a lab, but in a simple clay pot. Of course, a piece of old dough wasn't the only way to make bread rise. While sourdough was common, historians still debate the extent to which bakers in Roman Italy might have used other leavening agents. They knew of barm, the yeasty foam skimmed from the top of fermenting beer, which was used extensively by the Gauls and Celts to produce lighter, fluffier breads. Was there a trade in this kind of leaven? Could you walk into a Pompeian bakery and ask for the Gallic-style loaf? Or was the local sourdough tradition simply too ingrained? The evidence in Pompeii points overwhelmingly to the use of a sourdough culture, the classic Mediterranean method that relied on nothing more than flour, water, and time. It was the ultimate expression of waste not, want not, and it just so happened to be delicious. After a long, strenuous period of kneading, the baker deems the dough ready. It is now a single, smooth, pliable entity, alive and warm. He covers the trough with a large linen cloth to protect the dough from the ever-present flour dust and moves it to a warm part of the room. Now, the bakers wait. Under the cloth, the invisible army of yeasts and bacteria begins its work, feasting on the sugars in the flour and releasing tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide gas. The dough begins to swell, to rise, to breathe. An hour or so later, the baker returns. The dough has doubled in size, straining against its linen cover. The time for the first rise is over. With a single, decisive punch of his fist, he deflates the dough, which sighs audibly. The workers then haul the great mass onto a large, floured, wooden table. With swift, practiced movements, they use a bench scraper to divide the dough into smaller, uniform portions. Each portion is then expertly shaped by hand into a plump, round ball point one by one. The finished loaves are placed on long, flat wooden boards, like soldiers being assembled for review. They will rest here for a short time for their final proof, allowing them to puff up one last time before their fiery ordeal. The delicate, magical part of the process is now complete. The dough is alive, shaped, and ready. Now comes the moment of truth, a moment that requires not strength, but speed, not patience, but but precision. Now comes the trial by fire, a task that requires a steady hand, a fearless attitude, and a very, very long peel. The air in the bakery grows still and tense. The rhythmic work of kneading is done. The dusty chaos of milling has ceased. The fornicator has stepped back from the oven, his job of heating the beast complete. Now, another figure takes center stage. It might be the master baker, the pistor, himself, or a highly trusted specialist. This is not a job for an apprentice. He approaches the oven with the grim determination of a man about to poke a sleeping dragon. His personal protective equipment consists of a simple tunic and the silent hope that his arm hair will, eventually, grow back. He reaches for his instrument, not one of strength, but of profound skill. The peel that's called a pala in Latin, and it rests against the wall like a long, slender oar. The handle is a smooth pole of polished wood, at least 8 feet long, designed to keep its wielder at a respectful distance from the furnace. At its end is a flat, thin wooden blade, just large enough to carry a single, precious loaf. This is a tool of finesse, an extension of the baker's own hands, allowing him to reach into a place no hand could possibly survive. He dusts the blade lightly with flour, the fine powder skittering across the smooth wood. The loaves, now perfectly puffed up after their final proof, sit waiting on their boards like pale, expectant faces. The oven's mouth, a dark archway, radiates a heat so intense it is visible, a shimmering distortion in the air. Before he loads the first loaf, the baker performs a final, critical test. He grabs a tiny pinch of flour and, with a flick of his fingers, tosses it onto the hot stone floor just inside the oven's opening. It doesn't just smoke. It vanishes in a tiny, instantaneous flash of black, leaving no trace. Too hot. He waits a few minutes, letting a little of the initial, ferocious heat bleed out of the opening. He tries again. This time, the flour lands, sizzles, and turns a perfect, nutty brown before it blackens. He nods to himself. The temperature is right. This simple, sensory check is his thermometer, a piece of folk science passed down through generations of bakers, more reliable to him than any fancy gauge. Now, the performance begins. He slides the stone plug away from the oven's mouth, and the full, blistering force of the retained heat rolls out in a silent, suffocating wave. Without hesitation, he slips the peel under the first loaf. The movement is fluid, a gentle scoop that lifts the delicate, gas-filled dough without deflating it. He braces himself, takes a half step forward, and thrusts the peel deep into the glowing interior of the oven. For a moment, the pale loaf is silhouetted against the shimmering, white-hot brick of the far wall. He chooses his spot, then with a sharp, subtle jerk of the handle, he retracts the peel. The loaf slides cleanly off the blade and lands softly on the hot tiles of the oven floor, perfectly placed. He doesn't pause or admire his work. He pulls the peel back, swings it over to the board, and is already lifting the next loaf. This is a dance against time. The longer the oven door is open, the more precious heat is lost. He works with a focused, rhythmic grace, his body a simple pivot for the long arm of the peel. Loaf, lift, thrust, jerk, retract. Loaf, lift, thrust, jerk, retract. A pattern begins to form on the oven floor, a neat grid of pale spheres, each with just enough space to expand and be kissed on all sides by the radiant heat. This is like the world's most stressful version of shuffleboard. The target is a 2-ton brick furnace. The puck is a delicate ball of dough, and if you mess up, the entire batch could be ruined. The hierarchy of the bakery is a topic of great interest, and historians and archaeologists still debate the precise division of labor at this critical stage. Was the man with the peel, performing this most delicate and dangerous task, always the master baker and owner? It seems logical that the pistor would reserve the final, critical step for himself. Or, in a larger operation, was this a separate, specialized role? Was there a palaman, a senior worker who was neither the owner nor the furnace stoker, but whose specific skill was the graceful and efficient loading of the oven? The truth is likely varied, depending on the size and wealth of the bakery. But, whoever this man is, his skill is undeniable. He is the final guardian of the bread, the one who commits it to its trial by fire. He moves with a speed that suggests the floor is, in fact, made of lava, which, from a purely thermal perspective, is not entirely inaccurate. There is no dawdling in the dragon's mouth. In a matter of minutes, the entire floor of the oven is filled. Dozens of loaves now sit in the searing heat, the first stage of their transformation already beginning. The baker pulls his peel back. One last time, it's work done. The heat has already begun to toast the flour dust on its blade, giving off a warm, nutty aroma. Wasting no time, he and another worker heave the heavy stone plug back into the oven's opening, fitting it snugly. The light vanishes. The chamber is sealed. The loaves are now entombed in the blistering, silent dark. Outside, the bakery is quiet, the workers wiping sweat from their brows, the tense climax of their work now over. For a few moments, there is nothing to do but wait. But inside that brick beehive, a violent and beautiful magic is underway. The stored fury of the fire, the immense, radiant heat held captive in the masonry, begins its inexorable work on the delicate, living dough. The stone plug slots into place, and the world outside vanishes. You are now inside the oven, a silent observer floating in the blistering, silent darkness alongside the rows of dough. The air is thick with a dry, potent heat, an energy that feels ancient and absolute. There is no sound but the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the hot bricks. For a moment, nothing happens. The loaves sit, pale and still. But then, the transformation begins, and it is a process of beautiful violence. The first assault comes from below. The searing heat of the solia, the oven floor, radiates upwards into the base of each loaf. This intense thermal shock causes the water within the dough to flash into steam. Simultaneously, the yeast, in a final, frantic burst of activity before. The heat kills it, releases its last reserves of carbon dioxide. This is the yeast's last party, a furious, final metabolic scream before the music cuts out for good. R.I.P., little guys, your sacrifice will be glorious. This combined expansion of gas and steam forces the dough to swell upwards dramatically. This is the oven spring, the bread's magnificent, final gasp, giving the loaf its light, airy structure. As the loaves swell, their surfaces begin to change. The intense, dry, radiant heat from the oven's dome beats down from above. The moisture on the surface of the dough evaporates, and the skin begins to dry and stretch. This is the bread's awkward teenage phase. It puffs up, the outside gets all hard and crusty, but the inside is still soft and gooey. It's a glow-up, but it takes a few minutes. As the surface temperature climbs, two magical chemical reactions begin. First, the Maillard reaction, a complex dance between proteins and sugars, starts to create hundreds of new flavor and aroma compounds. This is where the savory, toasty, and deeply satisfying taste of bread is born. At the same time, the sugars on the surface begin to caramelize, adding notes of bitterness, sweetness, and a rich, nutty depth. The color of the loaves deepens, shifting from a ghostly pale to a warm ivory, then to a lustrous gold, and finally settling into a deep, rustic, reddish brown. While this dramatic transformation is happening on the crust, a gentler, slower process is taking place in the heart of the loaf. The heat gradually penetrates the interior, where the starches from the flour absorb the remaining water, swell up, and set into a firm but tender matrix. This is gelatinization, the process that changes the wet, raw dough into the soft, spongy crumb of finished bread. The gluten network you saw the baker develop with all that hard kneading now provides the scaffolding for this structure, trapping the gas bubbles and giving the bread its satisfying chew. The loaf is cooking from the outside in, the crust forming a protective shell that allows the interior to bake perfectly without burning. If you could listen closely, you would hear the song of the bake. It would begin with a soft, collective hiss as the steam first escapes the dough. This would be followed by a series of quiet ticks and crackles as the crust forms, hardens, and expands under the intense heat. It is the sound of 1,000 tiny fissures appearing on the surface, the sound of a shell being forged. The baker outside, if he were to press his ear to the hot stone door, might be able to hear this subtle music and know, just from its changing rhythm, how his bread is faring. But how did he really know when it was done? There is no glass window, no oven light, no digital timer beeping to signal the end of the bake. Historians and experimental archaeologists still debate how bakers controlled the baking time with such remarkable precision. Was it pure, unadulterated instinct, a sixth sense developed over a lifetime of bakes? Did they use a small water clock, a clepsydra, dripping away in a corner of the bakery to mark the passage of a set time? Or was the timing more informal, perhaps measured by the number of verses of a song the bakers would sing, or by how far the sun had moved across the sky? Knowing when the bread is perfectly cooked, crust formed, crumbs set, but neither burnt nor raw, without a timer is a legitimate superpower. The baker doesn't have an app for that. He just knows, after what feels like an eternity in the heat, but was likely only 20 to 30 minutes, the baker outside decides the moment has come. He moves to the front of the oven and, using a tool to protect his hands, pries the heavy stone plug from the opening. A great, billowing cloud of steam and the most incredible smell you have ever experienced rolls out into the bakery. It's the smell of caramelized crust, of toasted grain, of a deep, soul-satisfying warmth. The bakers breathe it in, the first reward for their long morning's work. The master baker peers inside the still glowing cavern. He nods, satisfied. Where pale, soft balls of dough once sat, there are now rows of dark, fragrant, crusty globes of finished bread. They are no longer just dough, they are panis. And standing out among them, you can see the city's most famous and iconic creation, the loaf that has come to symbolize Pompeii itself. The round, segmented, and utterly unmistakable panis quadratus. With the oven unsealed and its fragrant treasures revealed, the baker once again picks up his long-handled peel. The dance is now reversed. He plunges the pala into the hot chamber, deftly slips it under a finished loaf, and draws it back out into the cool air of the bakery. He unloads the oven with the care of a bomb disposal expert who also happens to be extremely proud of his delicious-smelling work. Each loaf he retrieves is a small, crusty victory against the forces of hunger. He slides them from the peel onto large wooden racks to cool. As you look at the rows of fresh bread, one particular type, the one you saw, being formed and loaded, stands out. It's the panis quadratus. This is the bread of Pompeii. More than 80 carbonized examples of this exact loaf were found preserved in the ashes, most famously in the bakery of Modestus, giving us a perfect, detailed picture of this ancient staple. It is a round, fairly stout loaf, perhaps 8 inches in diameter. Its most striking feature is its scored surface. A deep groove runs horizontally around its circumference, like a belt cinched around its waist. On top of the loaf, another set of indentations divides the surface into distinct wedges, usually 8 of them. The finished product, fresh from the oven, is a marvel of rustic beauty. The crust is a deep, ruddy brown, almost black in places, and dusted with the flour from the peel. As it begins to cool, you can hear a faint, continuous crackling sound, the song of the bread, as thousands of tiny fissures form in the hardening crust. Steam gently rises from its crevices, carrying that intoxicating aroma of toasted grain and fermentation. The unique shape of panis quadratus was not born from aesthetics, but from pure Roman pragmatism. This was bread with built-in sharing technology. In a world where a common person's cutlery consisted of their hands and their teeth, the pre-divided sections were a stroke of genius. A family could buy a single loaf, and the head of the household could easily break off a wedge for each person without the need for a knife. Laborers heading to the fields, sailors preparing for a voyage, or children grabbing a quick meal could snap off a portion with minimal fuss. It was convenient, efficient, and perfectly suited to the realities of daily life. It was the original tear and share. The purpose of that horizontal groove, however, is a little more mysterious. One theory is that the bakers tied a piece of string, a cingulum, around the ball of dough before its final proof. This would constrain its outward spread as it rose, forcing it to grow upwards, resulting in a taller, more compact loaf. The idea of tying up every single ball of dough with string seems a bit fussy, but it's certainly better than the alternative of trying to tie a string around a 400-degree loaf. That's a recipe for permanently surprised-looking fingers. Another practical theory suggests the groove was added after baking, a convenient channel for a string to be tied for carrying the bread home from the market or for hanging it up for storage. keeping it away from pests. While practicality was almost certainly the main driver of its design, it's tempting to see a little symbolism in the loaf. The 8 sections radiating from the center give it the appearance of a wheel, a powerful and ancient symbol of the sun, the seasons, and the cycle of life. It's not hard to imagine that this shape, repeated daily, might have taken on some deeper, unspoken meaning, a small, edible prayer for prosperity or a charm for good fortune baked right into the daily meal. While this is pure speculation, it adds a touch of poetry to this deeply practical object. Even the name is a source of friendly academic squabbling. Classicists and food historians still debate the precise meaning of panis quadratus. The word quadratus can mean squared or four-part. Does the name refer to the 4 primary lines that are sometimes used to create the sections? Or does it refer to the 4-sided shape of the individual wedges you could break off? A more complex theory suggests the name might not refer to the shape at all, but to its size. A quadrantal was a standard Roman unit of liquid volume, and it's possible that panis quadratus simply meant a standard-sized loaf, one made from a quarter of a larger measure of flour. The bread itself tells us how it was used, but its name still holds on to some of its secrets. Point one by one. The baker fills the wooden racks. The heat and smell pouring out of the bakery now act as a powerful advertisement, rolling down the Vico Stordo and out onto the main street. The bakery, which just an hour ago was a closed, internal factory of heat and flour, is transforming. As the loaves cool, their crackling song filling the air, the function of the space begins to shift. It is becoming a shop, a retail hub, the final destination in the long journey from grain to gullet. The first customers of the day are beginning to appear at the counter, drawn by the irresistible promise of fresh, hot bread. Their coins are ready, and the complex, noisy, and essential business of turning these beautiful, crusty creations into profit is about to begin. The scent of hot bread, a universal signal of comfort and sustenance, has done its work. A small crowd now jostles in front of the bakery's street-facing counter, a simple masonry ledge worn smooth by countless transactions. The baker who so deftly handled the peel has now donned a new role, shopkeeper. Or perhaps it is his wife, the pistrix, who manages the sales, her sharp eyes and quick hands making her a formidable businesswoman. The air hums with the day's first gossip and the clinking of coins. This is the moment of truth, where the baker's massive investment of labor, fuel, and flour is converted back into currency that a laborer with flour dust still on his tunic points to a loaf, handing over a couple of bronze asses. A tavern keeper's boy haggles for a bulk discount on 20 loaves, his payment recorded as a series of notches on a wooden tally stick. A simple, effective accounting system for regular customers in a world where literacy isn't guaranteed. Then, an enslaved person from a wealthy household, identifiable by their fine clothes and confident demeanor, buys a half-dozen loaves without even asking the price, paying with a single, heavy silver sestertius. The Pompeian customer service model is brutally efficient. Here's your bread, now show me the coin. There are no loyalty cards, but if you're a regular, you might get a loaf that isn't slightly burned on the bottom. Watching the coins pile up in the counter's worn depressions, you start to appreciate the immense financial risk a pister took on every single day. His profit was the sliver of silver and bronze left over after a mountain of costs had been paid. The grain was his single biggest expense. He had to buy it in bulk from merchants at the city's forum, the price subject to the whims of the harvest, the reliability of shipping from Egypt, and the greed of middlemen. Then there was the constant, draining cost of fuel, that mountain of wood we saw earlier. He had to pay wages to any hired workers and cover the expense of feeding and housing the enslaved members of his staff. The donkey that turned the mill wasn't just an engine, it was another mouth to feed. Add to that the rent on the building and the taxes owed to the Roman state, and it's a wonder he made any money at all. The baker's accounting system is a complex calculation of hope, anxiety, and a few frantic scratches on a wax tablet. He knows he's making a profit as long as the pile of coins at the end of the day looks bigger than his pile of worries. This vital trade wasn't a lawless free-for-all. The bakeries of Pompeii were under the watchful eye of the local magistrates, known as the aediles. These officials were responsible for maintaining public order and overseeing the city's markets. One of their most important duties was to ensure fair trade, which meant they could, and did, inspect the bakeries. You can imagine a stern-faced aedile or his assistant standing where you are now, his arms crossed, watching the baker weigh his loaves. The Romans were obsessed with standardization, and the aediles could levy hefty fines on any baker caught selling underweight bread. This threat of public humiliation and financial penalty was a powerful incentive for bakers to remain honest, ensuring that even the poorest citizen got what they paid for. Having the government inspector watch you work is always a bit stressful. The baker suddenly becomes intensely focused on quality control, hoping the official doesn't notice the donkey is currently trying to eat the profits. The most successful bakers, those who managed their costs and maintained a reputation for quality, could become influential figures. They were business owners, employers, and essential service providers. Their collective power was channeled through a professional association or guild, the Collegium Pastorum. Historians debate the true extent of bakers' political power, but the evidence suggests it was considerable. Political campaign slogans are found painted on the walls of several Pompeian bakeries, urging citizens to vote for a certain candidate. Was this just a simple endorsement from a respected business owner? Or did the Bakers' Guild actively use its influence and its control over the city's primary food source to sway elections and lobby for policies that favored their trade? It's likely a bit of both. They were the engine room of the city's metabolism, and that gave them a voice. You watch as the last of the morning rush dissipates. The baker has sold most of his panis quadratus and is now offering smaller rolls and perhaps some sweeter cakes made with honey and seeds. He looks tired but satisfied. His risk has paid off, for today at least. The sight of that finely dressed slave buying 10 loaves for his master's villa, however, sparks a question in your mind. For most of Pompeii's citizens, this bustling, public bakery is a lifeline. But for the city's wealthiest inhabitants, those living in sprawling, luxurious homes with dozens of servants and private gardens, relying on a public shop must have felt like a choice, not a necessity. This whole noisy, dusty, commercial operation was for the masses. It makes you wonder what was happening behind their high, vine-covered walls. Did the truly rich, the ones who set the fashions and ran the city, bother with all this? Or did they have private ovens of their own? You leave the noise and the crowds of the commercial street behind, turning into a quieter, more distinguished neighborhood. The energy here is different. Leaving the public bakery for a rich person's villa is like going from a loud, crowded rock concert to a hushed, serene yoga retreat. The air smells less of industrial-strength bread making and more of money, jasmine, and fresh basil. The high, windowless walls of the villas present a blank, imposing face to the street, but through an open doorway, you catch a glimpse of a different world. You step into the home of one of Pompeii's elite, perhaps the magnificent house of the Vetii, and the contrast is stunning. Instead of a dusty, earth-floored courtyard, you find yourself in a grand atrium, the open roof above letting sunlight fall onto a central marble pool, the impluvium, which catches the rainwater. The walls are covered in breathtaking frescoes of mythological scenes, the colors still vibrant after all these years. The sound is not of grinding stones and shouting workers, but of the gentle trickle of a fountain in the peristyle garden just beyond, its colonnades wrapped in climbing vines. You wander through this peaceful, opulent space, past rooms with intricate mosaic floors, and eventually find your way to the back of the house, to the service quarters. Here, things are more functional, but no less organized. You find a culina, the kitchen, and there, built neatly into the wall, is what you came to see. Another oven.it is much smaller than the behemoth at the public pastrinum, but it's unmistakably a baker's oven, built on the very same principle of a masonry dome and a flat baking floor. Its construction is finer, the bricks more carefully laid, the arch of its opening more elegantly proportioned. This wasn't a crude furnace for mass production. It was a high-performance appliance for a gourmet kitchen. This was a statement. The owner of this villa didn't need his own oven. The city was full of excellent bakeries. He had one because he could. It was a symbol of status, self-sufficiency, and ultimate control over his household's nourishment. Here, the baker was not a tradesman, but a highly skilled enslaved cook, the cocus. He didn't work with bulk shipments of standard-grade wheat. He likely used the finest flour, perhaps milled from grain grown on the master's own country estate and brought to the city just for this purpose. The bread made in this oven was not the sturdy, all-purpose panis quadratus. This was bespoke bread, pampered bread, the kind of bread that has never known hardship and probably wears its own tiny toga. The cook would have crafted loaves enriched with expensive ingredients that the common baker could only dream of: milk instead of water for a softer crumb, a drizzle of fine olive oil for richness, eggs for a golden color. He would have made sweetbreads, or panis dulcis, kneaded with honey and studded with imported dates, toasted nuts, and poppy seeds. The kitchen would have been equipped with specialized tools far beyond the simple peel and trough of the public bakery. You can imagine finding elaborate bronze molds, ferme, in the shape of a rabbit, a fish, or a seashell, used to bake beautifully shaped cakes and breads for the master's extravagant dinner parties or cene. These weren't just food items. They were conversation pieces, edible sculptures designed to delight and impress powerful guests. The ability to produce such delicacies in-house, tailored to the specific menu of the evening, was the height of luxury. It was a way for the wealthy to distinguish themselves, to eat a different kind of food, to literally consume their own superior status. The role of the person creating these masterpieces is fascinating. Roman culinary historians debate whether the enslaved cooks in these grand houses were merely skilled technicians, following the Roman equivalent of recipes, or if the most talented among them were innovative chefs in their own right. Was a cook, like the one in this kitchen, encouraged to experiment, to create new combinations of flavors and textures to surprise the master's palate? Or was he rigidly bound by tradition and the specific, often conservative, tastes of the family he served? It's a compelling question about the nature of creativity in bondage. The cook is expected to produce a perfect, honey-sweetened roll at a moment's notice. If he burns it, he doesn't just lose a sale. He risks a harsh punishment from a master who has just lost face in front of his dinner guests. The existence of this private oven shows that bread in Pompeii occupied two different worlds simultaneously. There was the world of the public bakery, a place of necessity, volume, and commerce, producing the carbohydrate fuel that kept the city running. And then there was this world, the private kitchen, a place of luxury, exclusivity, and artistry, producing bread that was meant not just to sustain, but to impress. Stepping back from the quiet opulence of the private kitchen, you see the city's two baking worlds turning in parallel. One, a furnace of public necessity; the other, a hearth of private indulgence. With the sun now high overhead, it's time to pull all these threads together, to witness how these people and their ovens weave the fabric of a single, ordinary day in Pompeii, from the first spark in the pre-dawn dark to the last satisfied customer at dusk. Stepping back, you watch as all the threads you've examined are woven together into the fabric of a single, ordinary day. The city is a living organism, and this bakery is one of its vital, beating hearts. The cycle begins in the profound, star-filled darkness of the Gallicinium, the hour of the rooster's crow, long before the sun has begun its ascent. A lone figure, the fornicator, unbars the bakery door and slips inside. Armed with his rake and shovel, he cleans the cold ash from the great brick beehive, his movements practiced and sure in the gloom. He builds his fire, the spark from his flint catching on a bit of tinder, a tiny, defiant sun born in the darkness. He coaxes it to life, feeding it twigs, then branches, then the heavy oak logs that will bring the 2-ton oven to its roaring, white-hot peak. For hours, his world is one of solitude, heat, and the growing power of the fire he commands. As the first hint of dawn, the matutinum, paints the sky in shades of gray and rose. The rest of the bakery stirs. The other workers arrive, their faces still soft with sleep. A switch is flipped. The quiet solitude of the fornicator is replaced by a symphony of labor. The heavy catalyst stones of the mills begin their slow, grinding turn, powered by the plodding, blindfolded donkey and the straining muscles of 2 strong men. A fine, pale dust fills the air, and the raw, nutty smell of crushed grain becomes the dominant scent. At the great wooden trough, the alveus, the kneaders are already at work, their arms plunging into the day's first mix of fresh flour, water, salt, and the bubbling, sour-smelling life force of yesterday's starter, by the ora tertia. The third hour after sunrise, the bakery is a marvel of controlled chaos. The oven, having been fed for hours, is now saturated with heat. The fornicator scrapes the last of the embers from its clean, glowing floor. The first mountain of dough, having been kneaded and allowed to rise, is punched down and expertly divided into round portions of panis quadratus. The air grows tense as the master baker takes up his pala. One by one, the pale loaves are loaded into the blistering heat, a ballet of speed and precision. The heavy stone plug is fitted into place, sealing the bread in its fiery tomb. But there is no rest. As the first batch bakes, the second batch is already being kneaded. The mills continue their relentless grinding for the third batch. The entire operation is a continuous, overlapping cycle of production. Around the fifth hour, the moment arrives. The oven is opened, and a glorious wave of heat and the smell of baked bread announce the completion of the first batch. The perfectly browned, fragrant loaves are pulled from the oven and set upon wooden racks to cool, their crusts singing a crackling song. The sales counter is opened to the street, and the day's first customers, drawn by the irresistible aroma, begin to arrive. A mother buys a loaf for her family's breakfast, a construction worker buys a wedge for his midday meal, a local tavern owner buys in bulk. Coins clink, neighbors gossip, and the bakery transforms from a factory into a vital community hub. The baker, wiping sweat from his brow, might make a quick chalk mark on the wall, a simple tally to track the day's production. 18 Merides, midday, the sun is high and hot, and the bakery is at the peak of its frenzy. The heat from the oven is immense. The workers take a brief, well-earned break. They don't stop for long, just enough time to sit in a shady corner and eat a simple meal, a piece of the bread they just baked, perhaps with a chunk of salty cheese and a few olives, washed down with water or cheap wine. The donkey, its work for the main batches done, is unharnessed for a rest, greedily drinking from a bucket of water. As he eats his simple meal, the baker might count the morning's earnings. He wonders, as historians do today, if this exhausting, endless labor will ever be enough to buy his family's freedom or a small plot of land, or if he is simply a cog in a machine, making a wealthy investor he rarely sees even wealthier. As the afternoon wears on, towards the ora nona, the ninth hour, the furious pace begins to ebb. The main batches of panis quadratus are baked and sold. The oven, while still blisteringly hot, is slowly losing its initial, intense heat. This cooler, gentler heat is perfect for secondary products. The bakers might now shape smaller rolls or bake hard, dry biscuits called paxamathia, a type of hardtack that would last for weeks, perfect for sailors and travelers. The crowd at the counter thins. The baker might lower the price of the few remaining loaves, eager to sell everything before the day is out. Finally, as the sun dips towards the horizon, signaling Vespera, the last customer departs. The work is not yet done. The long process of cleaning begins. The floor is swept, the kneading trough scrubbed, the tools wiped down and put away. Then comes the most crucial task of the evening. The baker takes a small piece of the day's last batch of dough, a living piece of his hard work, and places it carefully into its designated clay pot. He covers it with a cloth, setting it in a warm, safe place. This is the fermentum for tomorrow. The soul of the bakery is preserved. The cycle is ready to begin again. The donkey, having walked approximately to Naples and back without ever leaving the room, is led to its stable, its audible sigh of relief a final punctuation mark on the day's labor. The bakery falls silent, its great brick heart slowly cooling, resting for the work of the coming dawn. The cycle is complete, a rhythm as old and dependable as the rising sun itself. It feels as if it will continue this way forever. But this is the summer of 79 AD, and in Pompeii, forever is a much shorter time than anyone imagines. The day begins, just like the one before and the one before that. The cycle, which felt so eternal as you watched it yesterday, resets itself. In the pre-dawn dark, the fornicator lights his fire. At dawn, the donkey begins its circular journey, and the kneaders plunge their arms into the day's first dough. There's a particular chill in the air this morning. For centuries, everyone believed the eruption happened on a hot August 24th, But recent archaeological evidence has led many historians to fiercely debate this. The discovery of pomegranates, wine fermenting in sealed jars, and warm clothing on the victims suggests the disaster more likely struck in the autumn, perhaps October. This morning carries that hint of autumn, a crispness that makes the oven's warmth feel especially welcome. The city is unaware that it has enjoyed its last summer. For hours, everything is normal. The familiar rhythm of the bakery proceeds uninterrupted. Loaves are shaped, the oven is loaded, and the first batch is pulled out, its glorious scent mingling with the cool morning air. The bakers are in the middle of loading the second batch when, around midday, the ground gives a particularly violent shudder, stronger than the usual tremors that rattle the region. Tools clatter to the floor. The donkey stumbles and lets out a panicked bray. The men stop and look at each other, a flicker of genuine unease in their eyes. Then, one of them points towards the courtyard opening, his face pale. They all look. The mountain, Vesuvius, which has been a silent, green, and reassuring backdrop to their entire lives, is doing something it has never done before. A column of smoke, dirt, and ash of an impossible size is erupting from its peak, shooting miles into the clear sky. It rises and rises until it forms a vast, flat-topped cloud, looking, as a young Pliny would later write from across the bay, like a monstrous umbrella pine tree. For a few moments, there is only stunned silence. The city holds its breath. And then, the cloud begins to drift and the sky begins to fall. It starts as a fine, gray powder, a gritty ash that settles on shoulders and stings the eyes. Then come the stones. Small, white, porous pebbles of pumice, the lapilli, begin to rain down, clattering on the bakery's roof tiles like a sudden, bizarre hailstorm. The bakers abandon their work, staring at the sky as it turns from blue to a sickly, ominous gray. Panic erupts. The sounds of the city change from the familiar hum of commerce to a chorus of shouts, screams, and the thunderous, unceasing roar. From the mountain, the sun vanishes behind the ash cloud, plunging the bustling afternoon into a terrifying, premature twilight. The rain of pumice intensifies, the stones growing larger, thudding against the ground with dangerous force. All the morning's worries about profit margins and the price of grain suddenly seem wonderfully, laughably quaint. The new business plan is brutally simple. Try not to get buried alive. It lacks long-term growth potential. The baker makes a decision. He shouts at his workers, his voice tight with fear. There is no thought of the bread, no concern for the day's profits. The peel is dropped to the floor. The coins on the counter are abandoned. In a moment of pure survivalist instinct, the baker grabs a few of the finished loaves from the cooling rack, shoving one into the hands of his young son. The very product of their morning's labor is now their only provision for a flight into the unknown. They join the terrified exodus, running from the workshop that was their entire world. The donkey, freed from its harness in the chaos, is left behind, spooked and confused by the noise and the darkness. You remain a silent witness as the world of the bakery is unmade. The courtyard begins to fill with a thick, growing blanket of gray pumice stones. The roof tiles crack and shatter under the weight of the accumulating debris. A section of the roof over the mills gives way, crashing down in a cloud of dust and splintered wood. Inside the sealed oven, the second batch of bread sits in the darkness. The 81 loaves of panis quadratus are still baking in the trapped, radiant heat. But their destiny is not to be eaten. Their destiny is to become artifacts. The downpour of ash and pumice continues for hours, burying the city street by street, building by building. The bakery, with its warm, waiting oven, disappears from sight. Later, a series of pyroclastic surges, superheated, fast-moving avalanches of gas and ash, will sweep through the entombed city. The intense heat of these surges will carbonize everything organic. Wood will turn to charcoal, and the bread, both on the racks and sealed in the oven, will be baked for a second, final time, transforming it into a hard, black, almost perfect copy of its former self, a process that will preserve it for millennia. The oven, which began the day radiating life and the smell of fresh bread, now goes cold for the last time, entombed and forgotten. For nearly 2,000 years, it will. Wait in the silent darkness, a perfect time capsule of an ordinary day interrupted by an extraordinary death. It waits for the curious hands of the future to uncover its secrets and hear the faint echoes of its last, abruptly silenced, song. The oven goes cold. For a day, a month, a year, a century, it waits in the absolute darkness and silence. Above, the world moves on. The Roman Empire, in whose shadow the bakery had thrived, will itself crumble and fall. New languages will rise, new kingdoms will be born, and the memory of the city of Pompeii will fade from history into myth, a half-remembered fable of a place swallowed by the earth. Seasons turn by the thousand. Roots of wild vines probe the rich volcanic soil above. The bakery, with its waiting oven and its perfectly carbonized loaves, sleeps, a silent, unmoving witness sealed in a time capsule of hardened ash. It feels as if the silence will last forever. But this time, it does not. Then, after nearly 1,700 years of quiet slumber, the first curious hands of a new world begin to dig. In the 18th century, driven by the era's passion for antiquity, formal excavations begin. You can imagine the scene. A team of workers, sweating under the Italian sun, carefully chip away at the dense, gray layer of compacted pumice and ash. They don't know what they are looking for, only that a lost city lies somewhere below. They clear a space, revealing the top of a buried wall. They dig deeper, following the line of the structure, and break through into a hollow space. The air that rushes out is stale, ancient, and full of the fine dust of Vesuvius. They have found a room. They have found the bakery. As they clear the debris, the ghosts of the life you witnessed slowly reappear. The four giant hourglass mills emerge from their tomb of ash, some toppled and broken from the collapsing roof, others standing defiant, as if waiting for the donkey to be reharnessed. The great kneading trough, the alveus, is uncovered, a fine layer of petrified flour still visible in its corners. They find the carbonized remains of the wooden racks where the day's first batch of bread had been set to cool, and then, against the back wall, they find the magnificent brick dome of the oven. It is intact, a testament to its solid Roman engineering. Its mouth is sealed tight with its stone plug, just as the baker had left it in his final, panicked moments. With great care, the excavators pry the plug from the opening. They hold up their lanterns and peer inside, and what they see is a miracle. It's a scene that freezes time and closes the gap of 2 millennia in an instant. Sitting on the oven floor, arranged in neat rows, are the loaves of bread. 81 of them. They are black, hard, and light as charcoal, but they are unmistakably bread. The signature shape of the panis quadratus is perfectly preserved, its 8 sections clearly visible. It is the longest, most tragic bake in history, and the final product, though inedible, is one of the most poignant discoveries in archaeology. It is a direct, tangible link to the final moments of this place. The whispers from the ashes grow louder with every find. A bronze bell from the donkey's harness. The iron head of a rake used to clean the oven. The faint, ghostly impressions of sacks of grain that have long since decayed. And on the walls, they find the same graffiti you saw earlier, an endorsement for a political candidate, a lover's scrawled name. These simple messages are a profound comfort, proving that these were not abstract victims, but people like us who had opinions, passions, and a need to leave their mark. Even today, archaeologists and historians debate how to best present these discoveries. Should a bakery like this be left as it was found, a somber tableau of death, or should it be restored to help us understand the vibrant life that was so violently interrupted? It is the central question of Pompeii. Is it a museum, or is it a memorial? As your journey ends, you look at the silent, empty oven one last time. It is no longer a tool. It is an artifact, a monument to a lost craft and a lost world. It stands as a silent teacher, its cold, brick heart holding the memory of all the warmth it once created. It reminds us that history is not just about grand battles and the reigns of emperors. It is also about the small, repeated, essential acts of daily life, the grinding of grain, the kneading of dough, and the simple, profound magic of turning fire into food. The story of this oven is a whisper from the ashes, a soothing, circular tale of life, labor, and a loaf of bread, waiting for its baker who will never return. And so, the bakery grows quiet, its story told. The heat from that ancient oven, a warmth that once fed a bustling city, now fades into a gentle memory, a soft, receding glow in the landscape of your mind. Let the image of the sleeping city, tucked beneath its blanket of ash, be a strange and soothing comfort. All the noise, all the work, all the worries of that distant day have long since fallen silent, replaced by a profound and lasting peace. The cycle of the dough, the fire, and the bread is complete. There is nothing left to do now but rest. Feel the weight of your own body as you lie here, comfortable and safe, so far removed from that ancient time. Allow the rhythm of your own breathing to slow, to deepen, to find a steady, quiet pace, like the slow cooling of the oven through the long, peaceful night. Let any lingering thoughts dissolve like flour in water, becoming soft and smooth and calm. Your journey through the warm, dusty streets of Pompeii is over. You have heard the whispers from the ashes, and now it is time for your own well-deserved silence, your own gentle descent into the soft darkness of a peaceful and restorative sleep. The story is finished. Let the quiet settle around you now. Just the quiet.